Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we're going to be meeting with Kyle Williams of Investment Property Exchange Services, also known as IPX 1031. We used IPX last year for an investment property purchase that we had down in Arizona. We did a 1031 exchange. And so we got to kind of see the firsthand process of what that all means and all the details in between. So I wanted to share that with you on a high level. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashley. And thank you for everyone for joining us. As Ashley mentioned, 1031 is a very dry topic and can definitely be boring. Anytime you're talking about real estate tax law, it puts people to sleep. So I'll try to keep you guys awake. Real quick, a quick plug for IPX, but more importantly, when you refer out, you need to know who you're referring to in the 1031 world when you do refer, because 1031s are unregulated. Billions of dollars have been lost, so you have to be extremely careful. There's plenty of great companies out there, but you need to actually look at insurance policies, talk to people, know what their background is. We're the exchange division for Fidelity National Financial. So if you've worked at Chicago Title, Fidelity, Ticor, Commonwealth Lawyers, there's a whole bunch of others. Fidelity Home Warranty, we're all under that same umbrella. But again, make sure you know who you're working with. We're a publicly traded company, so we're audited regularly. Our financials are posted online. And most importantly, when you refer to us, your clients will not lose their funds. So what is a 1031 exchange? 1031 exchange allows an investor to sell their investment property and use all the equity, not just the after-tax equity, to reinvest into something bigger and better. That's the key phrase, all the equity, not after-tax equity. There's nothing else like Section Code 1031 in the Internal Revenue Code, because there's nothing else that allows you to buy and sell assets over the course of your entire life and never pay taxes. Some people might say, well, what about my IRA or my 401k? Not the same thing. One, you can't get at those until you're 59 and a half, so you're basically retired. But with 1031s, you may work with a young millennial couple, 30 years old. They just bought their first rental 2 years ago, and they've already got some equity in it. And in another year or two, they're going to sell that and exchange into a duplex or maybe even a couple other properties. And they're going to start building wealth, buying and selling, and not paying taxes on it. In the 1031 exchange, there's really just two things you want to do: buy for equal or greater value and reinvest your proceeds. That's it. There's rules about replacing debt. They can get confusing. But as long as you buy for equal or greater value and reinvest your proceeds, that's all you would need to do. So let's say you sell for $1 million and have a $400,000 loan that's paid off. So let's forget about closing costs for a minute. We'll just use round numbers. So sell for $1 million, $400,000 loan that's paid off leaves us $600,000 in proceeds. As long as we buy for at least $1 million and reinvest the $600,000 in proceeds, you'll have a successful 1031 exchange. Our job as a qualified intermediary is to hold funds in a safe and secure manner. So let's look at some taxes. Why is a 1031 important? What are you deferring? All right, 1031 permits deferral of capital gains. This is the big one. A lot of clients will say, we'll call in and say, Kyle, I'm thinking about a 1031, but realistically, I probably won't do one because I'm just going to pay 10% or 15% in taxes. It's basically impossible. Capital gains is based on, it factors into your adjusted gross income. So the total gain from the property, and if you and your spouse work, you're going to be over 20%, especially if you've owned a property for any length of time around here and you and your spouse have jobs, you're going to be paying closer to 20% on the long-term capital gains. But it doesn't end there. The next tax, we call this the hidden tax because most people don't know about it. Unrecognized gain due to depreciation, also known as depreciation recapture. It's taxed at 25% on a completely different set of funds than the capital gains are. So let's talk about that for a minute. Depreciation, you can write off. It's the number one tax benefit to even owning investment real estate. It's an amount you can write off over 27 and a half years on residential property, say rentals. It's got to be, it's not something you do on a primary residence, just investment property. So if you're writing off, let's say that the value of the structure, like the improvements on the property of your new rental, is worth $550,000. You divide that number out over 27 and a half years. So you're going to write off $20,000 a year on your taxes for the next 27 and a half years. It's called depreciation. Again, the number one tax benefit to even own investment real estate is that big tax write-off. But guess what? That's taxed at 25%. So let's say you've owned a property for 10 years and you've written off $20,000 a year, we'll say $200,000 on your taxes. That's awesome. I mean, you've written off almost $250,000 on your taxes just by owning a piece of investment real estate. But guess what? You're taxed on that at 25%. So there's a check to Uncle Sam for $50,000 on depreciation alone. That doesn't even include the capital gain. Because let's say that you bought the property for $700,000. Now it's worth $1.2 million. There's $500,000 in gain that you're going to pay probably close to 20% on. So that's another $100,000 on capital gain. So in that scenario, you're going to have a $150,000 tax bill, and that doesn't even include the net investment income tax, also known as the affordable healthcare tax or the Obamacare tax of 3.8%, basically on top of both of these. So if you ever ask your clients if they're doing a 1031 exchange when they sell their rental or their investment property, and they say, "Oh, I don't think I'm going to have much of a tax hit, it'll be like 10 or 15%. One, they need to talk to their CPA. But two, clients always think they're going to pay much less than they think they will pay. Have them give me a call. I can go over rates with them, but they'll definitely want to talk to their CPA and pencil all that out, because they will probably pay far more in tax than they think. So let's look at an example here. We're going to sell a property for $1 million. And on the left-hand side, we're going to cash out. We're not going to do a 1031. We've heard about this 1031 thing. It sounds confusing to us. We're probably just going to take our time and reinvest. So that's what we'll do. So on the left-hand side, we sell for $1 million. We pay tax. We'll say a collective tax rate of 25%. So there's $250,000 out the door. It leaves us $750,000 to reinvest, and at a 75% LTV, buys us $3 million in new property. On the right-hand side, you guys can see where I'm going with this. You sell for $1 million and don't pay any taxes, you get to reinvest that full $1 million. The exact same LTV, the exact same amount of leverage, turns $3 million in property into $4 million, just because you didn't pay your taxes. You have another $250,000 working for you, and leverage that out at a 75% LTV, that's $1 million in new property. The difference between paying tax and not doing a 1031 versus doing a 1031 and not paying tax. So you can get $1 million more in property in this scenario. And transactions like this are very, very common. And this might be spread out over a couple different properties or a few different properties, but very, very common. And the difference on $1 million in income alone, I mean, that might be, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year in income, just because you did a 1031. Multiply that out over 10, 20, 30 years. You may have an extra $1 million of income just because you did a 1031. And this doesn't even include, say, 20 years later, the appreciation and price difference. That $4 million property may be worth 10, and the $3 million property may be worth, 7.5, 8 million. So not only did you collect an extra, $800,000, $900,000, $1 million in income along the way, now you have a property that's worth a couple $1 million more, just because you bought real estate and held it long term. A story I like to tell: my best friend, his parents bought their first primary residence in Queen Anne, literally 50 years ago, early 1970s. They bought it for $25,000, and it was kind of a little rundown house on half an acre. They got an unsolicited offer a few years ago, and they had moved out a long time ago. So it had basically been a rental that they didn't really keep up that well. So they got an unsolicited offer a few years ago for like $1.6 million on a teardown on Queen Anne. Crazy, right? So they took that $1.6 million and put that down on a $5 million multifamily in like Auburn, Federal Ways, South King County down there. So here's these people, super, blue collar, middle class people that bought a property 50 years ago for $25,000, and now they own a property that's probably worth $6 million today, just because they bought and held real estate long term, right? Like, we can't ever guarantee what real estate's going to do year to year. I mean, even though real estate has even gone up in the last year, as crazy as it's been, there's no guarantee that it won't go down 10% next year, or there's no guarantee it won't go up 15%. Like, we don't know, but over long term, real estate's going to go up. It's a tangible asset. People need it. So with examples like this, if you're holding long term, the difference on $1 million is astronomical over time. It compounds, it accumulates. You're collecting income off that, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just an example of why 1031s are important. And again, transactions like this aren't uncommon. You guys all probably know people, retired Boeing engineer that owns 6 or 7 rentals in the area. You know, that might be $5 million worth of investment property. And they may do this a few different times. So transactions like this are not uncommon, especially in the Puget Sound area. Right, investors. Investors are awesome to work with. Less emotional. You guys all know people buying their primary residences are super emotional. Like, I know what I'm doing, and I'm still very emotional. Like, I don't think anyone ever wants to work with me if I'm buying a primary residence, because I'm super emotional with it. When I bought my first primary residence in 2005, like, it was my first time going through the process, and my agent didn't brace me for what an inspection report would look like. And I like flipped out when I saw the inspection report, and the inspection report was fine, but I flipped out. I lost it on him and started yelling at him, and like, I went crazy. I ended up buying the house and all worked out, but he had to be thinking to himself, like, this guy's a nutcase. And it's like, your clients that are buying their primary residences aren't nuts. They just appear that way because they're super emotional, right? Investors are much less emotional. Some aren't emotional at all. Investor clients are looking at bottom line. Sorry, Ashley.
They're emotional about the numbers.
Absolutely. Yes. Everything about the process is emotional, and like, looking at the numbers, very, very important, because that's what they need. You know, they're looking at bottom line. I know there's investors out there that won't even look at pictures of the property. You know, they'll crunch numbers on it. They'll get an inspection, and then they'll look at everything afterwards. But they don't want to get lured into the trap of, oh, this is a cute house, you know, we can do with this. When it's like, they can figure it out by not even looking at the pictures, by looking at the numbers, projected rehab costs, things like that. But yeah, much less emotional. Investor clients are motivated. They have 45 days to find a new property to purchase. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But they're super motivated. They will never be the clients where you've shown them every property from Woodinville to Renton in the last 18 months, and like, nothing ever works for them, right? Like, they're good people, but their offers are horrible and they've got bad luck. And it's like, you've wasted so much time with these people. 1031 clients aren't like that. They have 45 days. So it's like, they need to find something or they're not finding anything. So you basically, it's one of those, you get a yes or no very quickly on what's going to happen here. And multiple transactions. It's like the example I just gave you with my best friend's parents. You know, they sold a tear down for $1.6 million, bought a $5 million commercial property. It's not uncommon for us to see transactions where clients will sell something like that, you know, $1.2 million rental in Ballard, and buy 2 or 3 other properties totaling $4 million. So not only are you helping clients, you're getting paid very handsomely for helping them too. And investors really keep the market going. So I don't say all this to tell you, oh, don't work with people buying their primary residences, because that's your bread and butter. But having a little side book of investors is definitely going to help you, especially in down markets. Because if you were in the market, you know, in 2008, it was crazy. It felt like nothing would ever move. Like, real estate was frozen. Like, it literally didn't feel like, you know, a single house would sell anywhere. It was crazy. But you know who was buying properties? You know who bought at the bottom of the market? Investors. There are a ton of investors with cash right now that I don't even think they think we're at the bottom. And you know what? Maybe we are. I don't know. I don't think anyone really knows. But there's a lot of investors with cash right now that are just hoping and praying every night that the market drops a little further so they can go in and start gobbling up properties on the cheap. So again, it's great to work with investors because they're less emotional, they're motivated, and you get paid very well for helping them. How can we help investor classes? So if you guys ever want to do like a presentation in person, if you want to do a webinar, conference call with your investors, feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to assist with that. All right. With a 1031, you're not really eliminating taxes, right? You're deferring taxes. We all, Grandpa said, two things in life are inevitable: death and taxes, right? Well, only one of those really is, because guess what? We have the taxing figured out. Your heirs get a step up in cost basis. So let me give you an example of that. So my best friend's parents, they bought that property for $25,000. That's essentially their cost basis, we'll say. And now it's worth, say, $6 million. If they were to just sell it today, they would have a huge tax bill, an astronomical tax bill. But let's say they died today and my friend inherited that property. He would inherit it. His cost basis would be the value the day they died. So he could theoretically turn around and sell it tomorrow. And once he pays out commissions and stuff, maybe even take a loss on the property. That's crazy, right? So a lot of your investor clients, especially the savvy investors, they love real estate, but they're always going to own real estate. They'll have their own little portfolio of real estate. And granted, yeah, they may sell off some properties that are a pain to manage, don't cash flow, whatever the case is, but they're always going to own real estate. They have their own little mutual fund of real estate, and they're going to pass that on to their heirs tax-free and never pay taxes. So make sure you don't let your clients cash out of real estate and pay their tax. Just help them exchange into something that better hits their goals. I can't stress this enough. But we came up with a phrase a few years ago to make sure people never forget this concept. It's called swap until you drop. Now, same taxpayer requirement. Super important to remember. So if your clients are in a partnership, assuming it's not a spousal partnership, like a husband and wife LLC, let's say it's 3 or 4 people. If your clients are on title as a partnership, that partnership that sells also needs to buy. They can't break it up in the middle of the exchange. Acme Incorporated can't break up, the corporation in the middle of the exchange and all the shareholders go their separate ways and buy different properties. It doesn't work like that. Whoever the taxpayer is on title that sells also needs to buy. So for example, in Washington, we're a community property state. So if the client resides in Washington, they could actually sell as a spousal LLC if it's just them, we'll say a husband and wife, and buy as individuals, for example, like say joint tenants, or they can buy as that partnership if they really want to. But that wouldn't work if they reside in Oregon. So if you have clients and say like they live in Portland, but they're buying a property up here, the spousal LLC laws and rules are completely different for them because they're a common law state. They're not community property like Washington. So this is super confusing. This is something that clients need to work with their CPA on and make sure that vesting and stuff all lines up for what they want to do. But the one thing to remember is that whoever sells has to buy. Whether it's a corporation, a partnership, an individual, whoever that is that sells also needs to buy. Okay, like-kind property. One of the most confusing things to investors, especially investors that have never done 1031s, and it's their first 1031, figuring out what like-kind means. Because if we think like-kind, we think same thing, right? So if someone's selling land, they would have to buy land because that's like-kind. I mean, the Space Needle isn't like-kind with land, but guess what? The IRS says it is. Anything held for business or investment use is like-kind. Any type of real property held for business or investment use is like-kind. So like there really is no difference between the Space Needle and 50,000 acres of raw land in Tennessee. It's the exact same thing to the IRS. 30-year leases. This is interesting. If your clients have, say, like a 25-year lease, if they buy Taco Bell with a 25-year lease and like 2 5-year options to extend past 30 years, that's treated as fee simple property. If your clients have some sort of gain issue on Native American land that they own, on say like a 50-year lease, that's exchangeable as fee simple property. Retail, industrial, commercial. I mean, you can really get off into the weeds here with like water rights, like wetland mitigation credits, like all this weird stuff that people don't even know what it is exchangeable. So when it comes to like kind, it's a very, very broad definition. Let me back up. 1033. So 1033, eminent domain. This has been popping up a lot the last few years with like light rail and everything. But if your clients, and this also works for condemned property, say like your client's rental burns to the ground, or there's an eminent domain issue, they would do a 1033 exchange. One, it's nothing they would need to work with us on. It's all self-reporting on their taxes, but they would want to work with their CPA. Two, like kind means like kind when it comes to 1033. So if a client has a motel in Federal Way, and the light rail comes in and takes it through eminent domain, they would have 2 years to find another motel. They couldn't buy a gas station with it. That's not like kind when it comes to 1033. 1033 can be confusing. So if you ever hear 1033, eminent domain, condemned property, any of those things, I mean, I can answer basic questions, but they definitely need to be referred to their CPA because rules are completely different for 1033 and 1031. So not like kind properties, because it sounds like everything qualifies, and it's true, everything held for business or investment use does qualify. But what doesn't qualify? Personal use properties, primary residences, second homes, vacation homes, inventory, dealer properties, builder properties. This is why like Lennar Homes or KB or Pulte or whoever, any of those home builders don't do 1031 exchanges. That's inventory for them. That's their business. They have to pay tax just like the rest of us. Flippers don't qualify. So if you work with flippers, granted there's less of them now than there were a year ago, but they're still out there. And if you work with flippers, they don't qualify. Because the IRS has said there needs to be long-term intent for business or investment use. So then the question is, well, what's long-term intent mean? Well, the IRS has never defined it. But many CPAs will say, if you hold the property for a year and get some rents on it, report some sort of rental or business income, you're going to be okay. More conservative CPAs may say hold for 2 years just to be safe and remove all doubt. That being said, we've seen clients do exchanges after holding for 6 months because they get an unsolicited offer or something, and their intent was never to sell, but they got an offer they couldn't refuse, and their CPA says absolutely do a 1031 exchange. So these rules aren't set in stone. If your clients are flippers, then yeah, unless they slow down, collect some rents, and hold for a year or two, they're probably not going to qualify. But anyone else, any of your traditional investors that just have investment property rentals or what have you, there's not a hard and fast rule for them, but if they hold for a year, they're probably going to be okay. All right, timeframes, the nuts and bolts of 1031. Day 0 on the exchange, close of escrow. This means you need to set up your 1031 before close of escrow. I can't stress this enough. You can't retroactively start a 1031 exchange, and this happens all the time where clients will call and say, Kyle, I need to set up a 1031 exchange. I'll say, great, where's escrow? They'll say, oh, it closed last Tuesday. I'm like, well, yeah, you can't do a 1031 exchange. And they're like, well, I know I can't touch money, so I never had escrow wire it. It doesn't matter. Once the transaction closes, it's too late to set up an exchange. Realistically, it takes a little time to put these in place. So we try to target at least a week before closing, before structuring the 1031 exchange. So if the clients haven't closed yet, we could probably figure something out, maybe get an extension, do something. But if they've already closed, it's too late. There's no going back to set up the exchange. From close of escrow, they have 45 days to identify new property to purchase. There are 3 rules of identification. The first rule is the most common rule, the 3 property rule. Clients sell their investment property, they can identify up to 3 properties of any value to purchase. Pretty straightforward. And this is what most people do because they're going to buy, 1, 2, maybe 3 properties. But if that rule doesn't work, we've seen a lot of investors buying, like, say, Huntsville, Alabama, where real estate's a lot cheaper. I mean, they may sell a duplex in Ballard for $1.3 million. and they can buy 5 or 6 rentals in Huntsville, Alabama with cash. So if they want to do that, they want to buy a handful of rentals somewhere where real estate's cheaper, the 3 property rule doesn't work because they're buying more than 3 properties. So they'd go to the next rule, meaning they could identify any number of properties, but collectively they couldn't total more than 200% of what they sold for. So if that client sells for 1.3 million, they could theoretically, assuming they're going to identify and buy more than 3 properties, they could theoretically identify an unlimited number of properties totaling no more than 2.6 million, 200% of what they sold for. So, and if that rule doesn't work, if the clients want to identify the entire city of Bellevue, they theoretically could do that, but the caveat is, the catch is that they would have to close on basically everything. 95% of the value identified, otherwise the entire exchange fails. So the only time we'd see this is if your client's buying a portfolio property, and they're either going to buy that portfolio or just walk away and pay the taxes. You probably want to remember the 3 property rule. The other 2 can be super confusing, but most importantly, there is a rule that will work for no matter what your clients are doing. Okay, 45 days to identify, 180 days to close. Keep in mind, these are calendar days. So if you're buying say you identify a new build and you're 180 days on a Sunday, you better close on day 178 because you're not closing on the weekend. So, and this is the same with identification. If you're 45 days on a Sunday, you can submit everything via DocuSign, but I'm not going to be around at 8 o'clock at night to answer questions on a Sunday night, right? So, and you can't push it off till Monday. So we tell people, if you want to get everything lined up, if you want to check and make sure everything's submitted correctly, it looks okay, maybe call us that Friday. That way we can go through it. If there's any issues, that appear, we can let you know. The only time there are extensions issued are for federally declared disasters. These are not common. These are, think hurricanes in Florida, massive flooding anywhere, wildfires that burn down half a state, like big things like that, basically national news stories. But even then, like the Oso mudslides up in Arlington or Snohomish County a number of years ago, like all those people died, and tragic thing. But it wasn't a federally declared disaster. Like Governor Inslee declared a state of emergency, but it wasn't a federally declared disaster. So we basically tell clients, don't count on getting an extension. Granted, if you're directly affected by a federally declared disaster, we'll cross that bridge if it happens, but don't assume that you're going to get an extension. Mixed use exchanges. Duplex. This is a very common one. Let's say you live in one half, rent out the other half. The half you rent out, that's what you would exchange. The half you live in, you take the $250,000 or $500,000 primary residence exclusion on. But again, the half you rent out, you hold for business or investment use, that's what's exchangeable. Mother-in-law unit. If you have a monster-in-law unit in back, that's actually exchangeable because that's investment property. I mean, if your mother-in-law lives there and like literally and doesn't pay rent or anything, then it's personal use. But assuming you like run it out or what have you, that's actually exchangeable, whatever the value is. And you should be depreciating it. So your CPA should be able to tell you, what percentage of the property, what it's worth. But you can always get a broker's opinion of value too to figure that out. Old Victorian, this is basically what I would refer to as a split use property. Where let's say I have an Old Victorian, I live in the 2,000 square foot downstairs, but I rent out the 1,000 square foot upstairs on Airbnb, right? Whatever the values of that 1,000 square foot upstairs, that's what I'm going to do the 1031 exchange on. So just because I live on part of the property, it doesn't mean I can't 1031 part of the property as well. Let's skip that. Okay, reverse exchange. So reverse exchange, everything flips around. So instead of closing on your sale first, you close on your purchase first. Then you have 180 days to close on your sale. A normal 1031, it's less than $1,000. The reverse exchange would start at like $6,000. It's a completely different process. In a normal 1031, we just assign in, take title to funds, meaning we hold funds for the duration of the exchange. In the reverse exchange, we actually have to take title to that property. So we file an LLC with the state. Depending on where the property is, there may be title and escrow fees paid twice by the exchanger. Granted, we take title and then deed title over to you if we can't assign the LLC. So there's 2 title and escrow fees. Clients can't get traditional loans, conforming loans on the property. So they need to have cash or hard money. So long story short, we don't push clients or encourage them to do a reverse exchange unless it makes sense for them. And just because they're complicated and expensive. I mean, that's just scratching the surface. There's a lot more to these as well. But if a client needs to close on the purchase first, there's a way to do it. Just know that it's going to be a little cumbersome and expensive to do. And lastly, DSTs, Delaware Statutory Trust. So I think this is an awesome marketing idea for agents and brokers. DSTs are passive real estate investments where you're really just paying a trustee to manage the property for you. It might be, commercial or industrial property. You kind of like an Amazon warehouse, for example, that is worth $70 million. And the company that opens up that DST that buys the property may open it up to the first, say, 25 investors. So you park your $2 million in there, and all of a sudden you're, whatever, a 3% owner of an Amazon warehouse. You're just collecting a check every month. That's 100% passive. You're just paying a trustee to manage the property for you. You could have a portfolio of triple net lease properties, say like Walgreens, Taco Bell, Starbucks, AutoZones, things like that. One of the catches is that they have to be, these are securities, and they're a special type of securities. So they have to be, clients have to be accredited investors, meaning a net worth of $1 million or more. That being said, any of your investors that own a rental are probably have $1 million right there. So that's generally not an issue up here. But that being said, they would still need to make sure they cross that $1 million threshold. The downside is that because they're securities, you don't get paid when they go into the DST, but you get a listing you probably would have never gotten before. DSTs are extremely popular. I can't stress this enough with older investors right now, because who owns all the wealth in this country? Baby boomers, right? And what are they doing? They're retiring. What do they own? A lot of real estate. What do they not want to do? Manage properties. So as soon as they find out they can sell their rentals, that they love the real estate aspect, but they don't like managing it or any of the other things that go along with it, they can actually sell those investment properties, do a 1031 exchange, and go into a DST, where they become a fractional owner of, say, an Amazon warehouse, for example. And they're just going to collect a check every month. Super, super easy for them. But again, you get that listing because so many clients go into DSTs as soon as they find out. So it's nothing you have to be an expert on, but I can definitely connect you with local firms that handle DSTs, and you can, get some sort of referral thing going, or just I can make introductions. But DSTs are good to know for all of us from a 40,000 foot view, just because they're so popular right now. We see so many investors going into DSTs, and it's just a great way to get listings too if you go after listings.
I have a question on that. So when you depart from a DST, what does that look like on the exchange side?
Yep. So great question. So clients can exchange back into another DST. They can exchange into fee simple property. We personally think that, because over the last, really since COVID started, it seems like every investor has left the state. Every investor has bought property in one of 5 states: Idaho, Arizona, Texas, Tennessee, or Florida. It's like clockwork. But we think there's actually going to be, there could be a lot of investors that come back, right? Like if we hit a rough patch with the market, if Washington State cleans up a little bit, and real estate goes up too much in some of those other areas and comes back to life here, we think a lot of investors, like once they get out of the DSTs, they'll feel more comfortable coming back into Washington. People may exchange back out. But yeah, when the DST sells a property, clients can do an exchange into any type of fee simple property. And that means that you got their listing and they went into the DST, but they may exchange back out when they sell in, say, 5 years, and exchange back into fee simple property in the area. So it's a great way to get in front of people and a great talking point.
And the valuation would be based on what they get out of the DST and what comes up.
Correct. Yep. 100%. But this is my last slide as I wrap up here. Try to keep it between 30 and 40 minutes. So I think we're there.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is a great just overview. There's, like I said, it's a pretty dry topic, but at the same time, I think you're saying, what is the saying again? It's
swap until you drop.
Yeah, swap until you drop. I
Yeah,
think that basically says it all, right? It's like you're deferring the taxes and really building the wealth that way. And I think it's a good tool that people are often scared of exploring. And also, sometimes people want to know that they can get their money out with, money in pocket. And so you kind of have to explain to them, real estate is not the 2 to 3, 2 to 5 year play anymore. I think we're all talking to our clients about looking to the long term. I mean, you're looking at minimum 5, 10 plus to be able to survive the ups and downs. But we all know that, over the grand period of time we're a yo-yo on an elevator, basically, is what it is.
Yep, 100%.
So, but thank you. It doesn't look like there's any questions, but that was a great review. And I really, really do appreciate your time.
Anytime. If you guys think of anything, shoot Ashley an email. She can connect us, and I'm more than happy to answer those. So, have a great weekend, everyone.
Cool. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.